Lieutenant Sarah Chen adjusted her tactical vest for the third time in 5 minutes, her fingers betraying none of the nervousness that churned in her stomach. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Coronado training facility, where 32 of the Navy's most elite warriors stood in formation, their eyes forward, their silence speaking volumes about what they thought of her presence. She was the first female officer to be selected for the Advanced Combat Leadership Exchange Program, a pilot initiative designed to cross-train officers from different military branches. On paper, it sounded progressive and forward-thinking. In reality, standing among these battle-hardened SEALs, Sarah felt like an intruder at an exclusive club that had never intended to open its doors to someone like her. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tank Rodriguez stepped forward, his weathered face showing no emotion as he surveyed the assembled group. Tank had earned his nickname not from his physical build, though he was certainly imposing at 6'4", but from his reputation for rolling over any obstacle in his path during his 23 years of service. His chest displayed ribbons that told stories of conflicts spanning 3 decades, each one representing missions that most people could only imagine in their worst nightmares. "Welcome to Advanced Close Quarters Combat Training," Tank announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through blood, sweat, and countless successful operations. "For the next 4 weeks, you will be pushed beyond your comfort zones. You will face scenarios that will test not just your physical capabilities, but your mental resilience and tactical thinking." His eyes swept across the formation, pausing briefly on Sarah. She kept her expression neutral, refusing to show any reaction to the subtle challenge in his gaze. She had expected this. Every step of her career had been marked by similar moments where she had to prove herself worthy of standing alongside her male counterparts. "Some of you might be wondering why we have a guest from the Air Force joining us today," Tank continued, his tone remaining professionally neutral. "Lieutenant Chen comes to us with commendations in tactical planning and has requested integration training with special operations units. She will participate in all exercises and be held to the same standards as every other operator in this program." A few barely audible murmurs rippled through the formation. Sarah caught fragments of whispered comments, most of which questioned what an Air Force officer could possibly contribute to SEAL training. She had heard it all before during her time in Afghanistan, where her role as a forward air controller had put her in situations that many ground troops never experienced. But these men didn't know that story, and she wasn't about to volunteer her combat history to win their approval. The first week of training proved to be a carefully orchestrated test of endurance and technique. Sarah found herself paired with different SEAL operators for various exercises, each partnership feeling like an evaluation rather than a collaboration. During weapons training, she noticed how her partners would subtly position themselves to take point, assuming she would naturally fall into a support role. During tactical movement exercises, they communicated around her rather than with her, as if she were a piece of equipment to be protected rather than a fellow warrior. Petty Officer First Class Jake Bulldog Morrison was particularly vocal in his skepticism. A 10-year veteran with deployments in Iraq, Syria, and Somalia, Bulldog had seen enough combat to form strong opinions about who belonged in the fight. During a break between training sessions, Sarah overheard him talking to his teammates near the equipment shed. "I'm not saying she can't shoot straight or follow orders," Bulldog said, adjusting the magazine pouches on his tactical vest. "But when things get real, when someone's trying to put a bullet in your head, you need to know the person next to you can handle the pressure. Book learning and range time don't mean much when you're staring down the barrel of an AK-47. His words stung not because they were intended as personal attacks, but because Sarah recognized the genuine concern behind them. These men had survived impossible situations by trusting each other completely, and trust wasn't something that could be mandated through policy changes or diversity initiatives. It had to be earned through shared experiences and proven competence under pressure. The training scenarios grew progressively more challenging as the days passed. Tank designed exercises that pushed everyone to their limits, creating situations where failure meant not just personal embarrassment, but potential danger to team members. Sarah watched as the SEALs moved through each challenge with a fluidity that came from years of working together, their communication reduced to hand signals and shared glances that conveyed volumes of tactical information. During a particularly intense room-clearing exercise, Sarah was assigned to work alongside Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Ghost Martinez, a soft-spoken sniper whose reputation for precision was legendary within the community. Ghost had initially been reluctant to partner with her, but as they worked through the exercise, she began to notice subtle changes in his approach. He started including her in his tactical assessments, asking for her input on angles and timing, rather than simply telling her where to position herself. "You've got good instincts for reading a room," Ghost admitted after they successfully cleared a complex building scenario. "Your movement patterns show you understand how to use cover effectively." The compliment was understated, delivered in Ghost's characteristically quiet manner. But Sarah recognized it as significant praise coming from someone of his caliber. Small victories like this gave her hope that she might eventually earn the respect she sought, but she also understood that one or two positive interactions wouldn't change the overall dynamic of the group. The real test came during the second week when Tank announced they would begin force-on-force exercises using non-lethal training ammunition. These scenarios would pit different teams against each other in realistic combat situations, complete with the stress and unpredictability that marked actual firefights. Sarah found herself assigned to a 4-person team tasked with defending a mock embassy compound against an attacking force. Her teammates for this exercise included Bulldog, Ghost, and Petty Officer First Class Alex Reaper Thompson, a demolitions expert whose calm demeanor masked an explosive personality when the situation demanded action. As they reviewed the compound layout and planned their defensive strategy, Sarah noticed how naturally the 3 SEALs fell into established roles and communication patterns. "Standard embassy defense protocol puts our strongest shooter on the roof for overwatch," Bulldog explained, pointing to the building's highest point. "Ghost, that's your position. Reaper, you take the main entrance and watch for breaching attempts. I'll coordinate movement between the first and second floors." Sarah waited for her assignment, but none came. The 3 men continued their planning as if she weren't present, discussing fields of fire and fallback positions, without considering how she might contribute to their defense. Finally, she spoke up. "What about the rear courtyard?" she asked, studying the compound map. "It's blind spot from the roof position, and there's enough cover for an attacking team to stage there before making their assault." The 3 SEALs paused their conversation and looked at the map more carefully. Ghost traced sight lines from his intended position and nodded slowly. "She's right. I can't effectively cover that approach angle from the roof, so we put someone back there," Reaper suggested. "Chen, you can watch the rear approach and call out any movement." Sarah felt the familiar frustration of being assigned to what was essentially a lookout role. But she also recognized that gaining their trust would require patience and strategic thinking, rather than confrontation. She accepted the position and began studying the terrain, looking for ways to make her assigned sector as effective as possible. The exercise began at dawn, with Tank observing from an elevated position that allowed him to monitor all participants. Sarah took her position in the rear courtyard, using concrete barriers and abandoned vehicles to create effective concealment while maintaining sight lines to potential approach routes. Through her radio, she could hear the steady chatter between her teammates as they coordinated their defensive preparations. 20 minutes into the exercise, Sarah spotted movement in the tree line beyond the compound's rear fence. 2 figures in camouflage were using the early morning shadows to mask their approach. Moving with the practiced stealth that marked experienced operators, she keyed her radio and reported the contact, providing precise locations and movement patterns. 2 hostiles approaching from the southeast, using the drainage ditch for concealment, she whispered into her microphone. "They're approximately 200 meters out and moving toward the rear fence." Bulldog's voice came back immediately. "Copy that. Can you determine their intended breach point?" Sarah continued tracking the approaching figures, noting how they moved and the equipment they carried. Based on their positioning and the tools visible on their gear, she made a tactical assessment that would prove crucial to their defense. "They're carrying climbing equipment and what looks like cutting tools," she reported. "My assessment is they're planning to breach the fence at the northwest corner where the lighting is poorest. If they succeed, they'll have a direct path to the building's rear entrance." The information allowed her teammates to reposition themselves more effectively, with Reaper moving to cover the rear entrance while Ghost adjusted his overwatch position to provide supporting fire for the anticipated breach point. When the attack finally came, it unfolded exactly as Sarah had predicted, and their team's prepared response allowed them to repel the assault with minimal difficulty. After the exercise concluded, Tank gathered all participants for a debrief session. As was standard procedure, he analyzed each team's performance, highlighting both successful decisions and missed opportunities. When he reached Sarah's team, his comments were particularly detailed. Effective intelligence gathering and tactical assessment allowed Blue Team to anticipate and counter the primary assault, Tank observed. The rear observer's analysis of enemy equipment and intentions provided crucial information that shaped the entire defensive response. I hope. It was professional praise delivered in Tank's characteristic understated style, but Sarah noticed the subtle shift in how her teammates looked at her during the debrief. For the first time since arriving at the facility, she felt like she was being seen as a contributing member, rather than an outsider to be accommodated. That evening, as the teams cleaned their equipment and prepared for the next day's training, Ghost approached Sarah at the weapons maintenance station. "Good call on those climbers today," he said, his voice carrying genuine appreciation. "Most people would have just reported movement and left it at that. Your tactical read saved us from getting flanked." The acknowledgement felt more significant than any formal commendation Sarah had received in her career. It represented the beginning of something she had been working toward since the first day of training. Acceptance based on demonstrated competence, rather than tolerance based on policy requirements. But she also understood that this was just the beginning, and that the real challenges still lay ahead. The third week of training brought a new level of intensity that pushed every participant to their breaking point. Tank had designed a series of scenario-based exercises that combined physical exhaustion with complex decision-making under pressure. Sleep deprivation, limited food rations, and constant stress created an environment that mimicked the harsh realities of extended combat operations. Sarah found herself operating on 4 hours of sleep over the past 2 days, her body running on adrenaline and determination. The other trainees showed similar signs of fatigue, but she noticed how the experienced SEALs seemed to draw on reserves of endurance that came from years of similar challenges. Their movements remained precise, even as exhaustion clouded their thinking, a testament to training that had become instinct. The morning briefing took place in a converted warehouse that had been transformed into a mock urban environment, complete with multiple buildings, narrow alleyways, and realistic civilian areas. The facility represented the kind of complex operational environment that modern special forces encountered regularly. Tank stood before a large tactical display, his expression more serious than usual as he prepared to outline the day's exercise. Today's scenario involves a hostage rescue operation in a hostile urban environment, Tank announced, his voice carrying the weight of real-world experience. Intelligence indicates that high-value targets are being held in a 3-story building surrounded by enemy combatants. Your mission is to infiltrate the area, neutralize the threats, and extract the hostages without civilian casualties. He paused, allowing the complexity of the mission to sink in before continuing. This exercise will test everything you've learned over the past 3 weeks: communication, tactical movement, weapons handling, and decision-making under pressure. Failure in any of these areas will result in mission failure and potential loss of life. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the multiple entry points, overlapping fields of fire, and civilian areas that would complicate any assault plan. The scenario was designed to have no easy solutions, requiring teams to balance speed and stealth while managing multiple variables simultaneously. Teams will be assigned randomly, Tank continued, and each team will be given different intelligence packages to work with. Some information will be accurate, some will be outdated, and some will be deliberately false. Your ability to adapt to changing conditions and verify intelligence in real time will determine your success. The random team assignments separated Sarah from the SEALs she had been building relationships with over the past weeks. Instead, she found herself paired with operators she had barely worked with, including several who had remained skeptical of her presence throughout the training. Her new team leader was Petty Officer First Class Derek "Hammer" Johnson, a veteran of multiple Middle East deployments, whose nickname came from his direct approach to both combat and interpersonal relationships. All right, listen up, Hammer said as their four-person team huddled around their intelligence package. We've got 20 minutes to plan this operation before we move out. According to this intel, we're dealing with 6 to 8 hostiles, armed with assault rifles, plus an unknown number of civilians in the target building. Sarah studied the intelligence documents, immediately noticing inconsistencies in the reported enemy positions and capabilities. Her experience as a forward air controller had taught her to scrutinize intelligence reports carefully, looking for gaps or contradictions that might indicate outdated or unreliable information. The timeline on this intel bothers me, she said, pointing to the date stamps on various reports. Some of these enemy position reports are 12 hours old, which means they could have completely changed their defensive setup since this information was gathered. Hammer glanced at the documents briefly before dismissing her concerns. Intel is intel. We work with what we've got and adapt on the ground if needed. Your job is to follow the plan and stay out of the way when the shooting starts. The dismissive response stung, but Sarah forced herself to focus on the mission rather than personal grievances. She continued studying the intelligence package, noting details that might prove important during the actual operation. Her training had taught her that successful missions often depended on seemingly minor information that others might overlook. As the teams moved into position around the mock urban environment, Sarah noticed Hank positioning himself at various observation points where he could monitor the exercise from multiple angles. Several assistant instructors were also strategically placed to ensure safety and provide realistic opposition force behavior. The level of preparation and attention to detail impressed her. Even as she recognized the inherent dangers of the exercise, the insertion phase went smoothly, with Sarah's team moving through the urban environment, using cover and concealment effectively. Hammer proved to be a competent tactical leader, positioning team members to maximize their effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Sarah found herself assigned to a supporting role, providing rear security while the other 3 operators prepared for the actual building assault. Everything changed when they reached the target building and discovered that the intelligence package had been woefully inaccurate. Instead of 6 to 8 hostiles, they encountered a defensive position that appeared to hold at least 12 enemy combatants, spread across multiple floors. The enemy force was also better equipped than anticipated, with what appeared to be crew-served weapons covering the primary approach routes. "This is way more than we bargained for," whispered Petty Officer Second Class Mike Slider Williams, the team's demolitions expert. "We need to call for backup or abort and replan." Hammer studied the building through his binoculars, weighing their options. "Negative. The hostages could be moved or eliminated if we delay. We stick to the original plan and adapt as needed." Sarah felt compelled to voice her concerns about the tactical situation. "The enemy force is too large for our team size, and their defensive positions give them significant advantages. If we proceed with the original plan, we're likely to take casualties while failing to secure the hostages." "Nobody asked for your assessment," Hammer replied sharply, his frustration with the situation evident in his tone. "You're here to observe and learn, not to second-guess tactical decisions made by experienced operators." The rebuke was delivered loudly enough for the other team members to hear, creating an uncomfortable tension that threatened to undermine team cohesion at a critical moment. Sarah felt the familiar surge of anger that came from being dismissed based on preconceptions rather than merit. But she also recognized that arguing with the team leader would only make the situation worse. The assault began poorly and deteriorated rapidly from there. Hammer's insistence on following the original plan despite changed conditions led to immediate problems as the team encountered stronger resistance than anticipated. Within minutes, 2 team members had been marked as casualties by the exercise controllers, leaving only Hammer and Sarah to continue the mission. "We need to extract now," Sarah urged as simulated gunfire erupted around their position. "We're outnumbered and outgunned. There's no way to complete the mission with our current resources." Hammer's pride and determination had taken over his tactical judgment. "We finish what we started. The hostages are depending on us." Against all tactical wisdom, he prepared to assault the building's main entrance alone. A decision that would almost certainly result in mission failure and his simulated death. Sarah watched in dismay as months of professional training and operational experience were abandoned in favor of a heroic but suicidal gesture. At that moment, Tank appeared at their position, having observed the team's deteriorating situation from his overwatch position. His presence was supposed to be unobtrusive, maintaining the realism of the exercise while ensuring participant safety. But Hammer's increasingly reckless decisions had apparently crossed a threshold that demanded instructor intervention. "Stand down and reassess," Tank ordered, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Your current course of action will result in mission failure and unnecessary casualties." Instead of acknowledging the instructor's guidance, Hammer's frustration boiled over into direct confrontation. "With all due respect, Master Chief, this is our mission and our call. We don't need interference from observers." The disrespectful response created a dangerous dynamic within the exercise environment. Tank's role as both safety supervisor and senior instructor demanded immediate resolution of the situation, but Hammer's emotional state had clearly compromised his judgment and professionalism. "Petty Officer Johnson, you will stand down immediately and await further instructions," Tank commanded, his voice taking on the edge that every SEAL recognized as non-negotiable authority. Sarah watched the confrontation unfold with growing alarm, recognizing that the situation had moved beyond simple training disagreement into potential disciplinary territory. Hammer's body language showed he was preparing to continue arguing with the instructor, a course of action that would likely end his career and certainly terminate his participation in the training program. What happened next occurred so quickly that most observers would later struggle to reconstruct the exact sequence of events. Tank had approached Hammer's position to ensure compliance with his stand-down order, his tactical rifle held in a low-ready position, as was standard during exercise supervision. Hammer, in his emotional state, moved toward the instructor in what appeared to be an aggressive manner. In that moment of escalating tension, with multiple variables threatening to turn a training exercise into a serious incident, Sarah acted on instincts that had been honed through years of high-pressure situations. Moving with speed and precision that surprised everyone present, she stepped between the two men and smoothly removed Tank's rifle from his hands, simultaneously creating distance and eliminating the potential for the situation to escalate into physical confrontation. "Stand down, both of you," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone trained to take control of chaotic situations. The rifle was now in her possession, pointed safely away from all personnel, while both men stared at her in stunned silence. Tank's expression showed surprise rather than anger, as if he were processing not just what had happened but how it had been accomplished with such professional competence. Hammer stood frozen, apparently unable to comprehend that the female officer he had been dismissing throughout the exercise had just diffused a situation that could have destroyed his career. "This exercise is terminated," Sarah announced, maintaining control of the weapon while addressing both men. "Master Chief Tank, your safety supervision protocols were sound, but the emotional temperature of this situation requires cooling off time before continuation. Petty Officer Johnson, your tactical decisions were compromised by frustration and pride, not by enemy action." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sounds of other teams continuing their exercises in different sections of the facility. Sarah stood between two of the Navy's most experienced warriors, holding a weapon she had taken from a SEAL instructor, having assumed command authority that nobody had officially granted her. Tank slowly nodded, his professional assessment overriding any personal reaction to the unprecedented situation. Exercise terminated. All personnel returned to the staging area for debrief. As word spread through the facility about what had occurred, Sarah found herself at the center of attention that she had never sought or desired. The story would be retold dozens of times over the following hours, with each telling adding new details and interpretations. But the basic facts remained undeniable. The Air Force officer had taken control of a dangerous situation with skill and authority that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Hammer, his anger replaced by embarrassment and grudging respect, approached Sarah as they secured their equipment. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his voice stripped of the bravado that had characterized their earlier interactions. "You were right about the tactical situation, and I let my ego override my training. That's not who I am as an operator." Sarah handed Tank's rifle back to him with the same smooth professionalism she had demonstrated when taking possession of it. No apology needed. We all have moments when the pressure gets to us. The important thing is learning from the experience. Tank observed the interaction without comment, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts about the day's events. But Sarah noticed how his evaluation of her had fundamentally shifted, as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time since her arrival at the facility. The incident had lasted less than 5 minutes, but its impact on the dynamics within the training program would extend far beyond that brief confrontation. Sarah had demonstrated capabilities that went beyond marksmanship or tactical movement, showing leadership and decision-making skills under pressure that earned recognition from warriors who gave respect only to those who had proven themselves worthy. As they walked back toward the main facility, Sarah reflected on how dramatically the situation had changed from her arrival 3 weeks earlier. She was no longer the outsider seeking acceptance, but a respected member of a community that valued competence above all other considerations. The weapon she had taken from the instructor had become a symbol of her transition from observer to participant, from guest to equal member of an elite warrior culture. The mess hall buzzed with conversation that evening, but Sarah noticed how discussions quieted when she approached different groups. Word of the warehouse incident had spread through the entire facility with the speed that marked all military communities, and she found herself receiving nods of acknowledgement from SEALs who had barely spoken to her during the previous 3 weeks. She selected a table in the corner, hoping to eat her meal in relative peace while processing the day's events. The emotional intensity of the confrontation had left her drained, and she needed time to understand what had really happened and what it might mean for the remainder of her training program. Ghost appeared at her table without invitation, setting down his tray and taking the seat across from her. His usually reserved demeanor seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen it, as if some invisible barrier between them had been removed during the afternoon's drama. "Hell of a thing you did today," Ghost said quietly, cutting into his meal with characteristic precision. Most people would have either frozen up or made the situation worse. "You read the dynamics and acted exactly right." Sarah appreciated the compliment, but she also felt compelled to address the elephant in the room that nobody seemed willing to discuss directly. "I took a weapon away from your Master Chief in front of his students. That's not something that should be celebrated." Ghost paused his eating and looked at her with an expression that mixed respect with something approaching admiration. "You prevented a good instructor from making a career-ending mistake and saved a decent operator from destroying himself. Tank knows it, Hammer knows it, and everyone who witnessed it knows it. That takes more courage than charging a machine gun nest." Before Sarah could respond, Bulldog and Reaper joined them at the table, their arrival creating an impromptu gathering that drew attention from other diners in the mess hall. Bulldog, who had been among her harshest critics during the early weeks of training, wore an expression of genuine respect as he settled into his chair. "We've been talking among ourselves about what happened today," Bulldog said without preamble, his characteristic bluntness evident in his approach to the conversation. "Most of us figured you were here because some desk jockey thought it would look good for public relations. We were wrong about that." The admission was delivered in Bulldog's straightforward style, without elaborate apologies or excuses. But Sarah recognized it as a significant gesture from someone who rarely acknowledged being wrong about anything. The fact that he was speaking for a group suggested that her actions had created a broader shift in perception among the SEAL community. Reaper nodded his agreement before adding his own perspective. "Leadership isn't something you can teach in a classroom or test on a firing range. It's something you demonstrate when everything goes sideways and people are looking for someone to take control. You did that today." Asked. "The cons twos in A7. Asked us." The conversation was interrupted by Tank's arrival at their table, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the immediate area. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nervousness as she prepared for what could be either recognition or disciplinary action for her unprecedented intervention in the training exercise. "Lieutenant Chen, I need to speak with you privately," Tank said, his tone revealing nothing about his intentions or mood. "If you're finished with your meal, please join me in my office." Sarah followed Tank through the facility's corridors, noting how other personnel stepped aside respectfully as the Master Chief passed. His office was spartanly decorated with commendations, unit photographs, and tactical manuals. creating an environment that spoke to decades of professional military service. Tank closed the door and gestured for Sarah to take a seat before settling behind his desk. For a long moment, he studied her with the same analytical intensity he brought to evaluating combat operations, as if he were still processing the day's events and their implications. In 23 years of military service, Tank began, his voice carrying the weight of extensive experience. I've seen a lot of situations go sideways in a hurry. What happened today in that warehouse could have ended very badly for everyone involved. Sarah prepared herself for criticism about overstepping boundaries or undermining instructor authority, but Tank's next words surprised her with their directness and honesty. Your intervention prevented what could have been a serious incident with lasting consequences for multiple careers, Tank continued. The way you read the situation, positioned yourself, and took control showed tactical awareness and leadership judgment that can't be taught through standard curriculum. The acknowledgement was delivered in Tank's characteristically understated manner, but Sarah recognized it as high praise from someone who rarely offered compliments to anyone, much less to outsiders participating in SEAL training programs. However, Tank added, his tone becoming more serious, we need to discuss what your actions mean for the remainder of your time here, and how we proceed with the rest of the training program. Sarah felt a sudden concern that her intervention might have created complications that would result in her early dismissal from the program. The irony of earning respect through actions that might end her participation was not lost on her. Master Chief, I understand that my actions were unprecedented and potentially problematic from a chain of command perspective, Sarah said carefully. If my continued presence here creates difficulties for the program or for your students, I'm prepared to withdraw and return to my regular duties. Tank leaned back in his chair, a slight smile creasing his weathered features for the first time since Sarah had arrived at the facility. Lieutenant, you're missing the point entirely. Your actions today demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and tactical awareness that this program is designed to develop. The question isn't whether you should continue, but how we can best utilize your remaining time here. Relief flooded through Sarah as she realized that her fears about program termination were unfounded. Tank's response suggested that her intervention had been viewed as a positive demonstration of capability, rather than a breach of protocol. The remaining week of training will focus on advanced tactical leadership scenarios, Tank explained, pulling out a training schedule and modifying it as he spoke. Rather than continuing in a purely observational role, you'll be integrated into the command structure for several complex operations. The shift represented a fundamental change in her status within the program, moving from participant to recognized leader, whose contributions would be actively sought, rather than merely tolerated. It was the kind of professional recognition that Sarah had been working toward throughout her military career. The following days proved to be the most challenging and rewarding of Sarah's time at the SEAL facility. The advanced leadership scenarios pushed her to apply everything she had learned, while making real-time decisions that affected entire team operations. Her background as a forward air controller proved invaluable, as she coordinated complex missions that required integration between different tactical elements. During a particularly complex urban warfare exercise, Sarah found herself commanding a joint team that included both SEALs and simulated conventional forces. The scenario required her to balance competing objectives while managing limited resources and time constraints that mirrored real-world operational pressures. Blue Team, advance to Building 2 and establish overwatch positions, Sarah commanded through her radio, coordinating movements across a mock city environment. Red Team, hold your current position until Blue Team confirms security. Then proceed with your assault on the target building. Her tactical decisions demonstrated an understanding of how different military specialties could work together effectively, drawing on her experience with joint operations, while applying lessons learned during 3 weeks of intensive SEAL training. The seamless integration of air support coordination with ground tactical movement impressed even the most experienced instructors. Tank observed the exercise from his command post, occasionally providing guidance to his assistant instructors, but allowing Sarah to maintain operational control throughout the complex scenario. His evaluation would later note her ability to maintain situational awareness while making rapid tactical adjustments based on changing conditions. When the exercise concluded successfully, with all objectives achieved and minimal simulated casualties, Sarah felt a sense of professional accomplishment that exceeded anything she had experienced in her previous assignments. The respect evident in her team members' debriefs confirmed that she had truly earned acceptance within the SEAL community. The final day of the program arrived with a formal graduation ceremony that recognized the achievements of all participants. Sarah stood among the assembled SEALs, no longer feeling like an outsider but as someone who had proven herself worthy of the warrior community's respect and friendship. Tank delivered the closing remarks with his characteristic blend of professional pride and hard-earned wisdom. The past 4 weeks have tested your capabilities, challenged your assumptions, and pushed you beyond what you thought possible. Some of you arrived here thinking you knew what leadership looked like. Others learned that true leadership emerges in moments of crisis when someone needs to step forward and take control. His eyes found Sarah in the formation, acknowledging her transformation from skeptical observer to respected leader without singling her out for special attention. The warriors standing beside you today have earned the right to be called teammates through their actions under pressure, Tank continued. Take that trust seriously, because it's the foundation of everything we do as special operations professionals. After the ceremony concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by SEALs who wanted to share contact information and extend invitations for future joint training opportunities. The relationships formed during 4 weeks of intensive training had created professional networks that would benefit her throughout her military career. Hammer approached her during the informal reception that followed the graduation ceremony, his demeanor showing none of the tension that had marked their earlier interactions. "Lieutenant, I wanted to thank you again for what you did in that warehouse. I've had some time to think about it, and I realize how badly I screwed up that day." Sarah appreciated his honesty and the personal growth that his acknowledgement represented. We all have moments when the pressure gets to us. The important thing is learning from the experience and becoming better operators because of it. As she prepared to leave Coronado and return to her regular Air Force duties, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her perspective had changed during the month-long program. She had arrived seeking to prove herself worthy of respect from an elite military community, but she was leaving with something more valuable: genuine friendships with warriors who valued competence above all other considerations. Tank appeared at her vehicle as she loaded her gear for the journey home, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something to remember your time here," he said simply, handing her the gift without ceremony. Inside the package, Sarah found a SEAL Trident pin, along with a handwritten note that read, "Leadership is not about rank or authority, but about courage to act when action is needed. You understand that better than most. Tank." The gift represented more than simple recognition of her achievements during the training program. It symbolized acceptance into a brotherhood that extended far beyond formal military structures, creating bonds that would endure long after uniforms were retired and careers ended. As Sarah drove away from the Coronado facility, she carried with her not just new tactical skills and professional certifications, but a transformed understanding of what it meant to earn respect through demonstrated competence. The woman who had nervously adjusted her tactical vest on that first morning had become someone who could command the respect of the Navy's most elite warriors through actions that spoke louder than any words. The incident in the warehouse, when she had taken an instructor's weapon to defuse a dangerous situation, had become the defining moment of her training experience. But more importantly, it had revealed leadership capabilities that would serve her throughout the remainder of her military career and beyond. The SEALs had thought she was no fighter when she first arrived at their training facility. By the time she left, they knew she was something more valuable than just another warrior. She was a leader who could be trusted to make the right decisions when everything hung in the balance. That trust, earned through courage and competence, would prove to be the most valuable lesson of her entire military education.